The apocalypse beneath our feet. The instant eruption of all volcanoes. Imagine this. All over the planet, from dense forests to icy deserts, the ground suddenly starts to tremble right beneath your feet. Earthquakes from which there is nowhere to hide. At the very same moment, thousands of volcanoes around the world awaken and literally erupt all at once. The majestic Fuji in Japan, the dangerous St. Helens in the United States, the massive Krakatoa in Indonesia, the colossal Vesuvius in Italy, along with hundreds of other limestone giants, rocky monsters, and underwater volcanoes, all shoot pillars of ash and lava into the sky. The surface of the planet begins to crack, with molten rock gushing out in fountains. In cities located at the foot of volcanoes, such as Naples, Quito, and Seattle, people witness fiery clouds the size of skyscrapers erupting skyward. In just a few seconds, a chain reaction of powerful explosions begins on the Earth's surface. Underwater volcanoes eject millions of gallons of hot lava into the oceans, instantly vaporizing vast amounts of water. Columns of fire and lava shoot thousands of feet into the air, while deafening explosions erupt all around, more powerful than any nuclear weapon known to man. In some regions, the ground literally splits open, and clouds of poisonous gas burst out from the fissures. Some volcanoes, like Yellowstone, eject so much magma and ash into the air that entire states end up buried under their remnants. In the blink of an eye, the forests around Kilimanjaro and Etna are engulfed in flames. Volcanic lava rushes down the slopes, consuming everything in its path. In the Andes and the Himalayas, air masses mix with scorching ash. Each eruption triggers local tsunamis, earthquakes, and multiple landslides. Even in the most remote corners of the planet, where volcanoes have slept for millennia, the Earth reveals its depths and spews out gases, ash, and lava. And even those who have never seen a volcano feel as if the Earth itself has turned into a giant cauldron, with tongues of flame bursting out of it. But this is only the beginning of the apocalypse, because the most terrifying consequences, which will instantly engulf the planet's surface, will manifest themselves within the next few minutes. Flames, lava, and gigantic tongues of fire. What does the Earth look like in the first minutes? The first minutes after the simultaneous eruption of all volcanoes look like a scene from another reality. All over the planet, streams of lava burst out from cracks and craters. Rivers of fire instantly engulf cities, fields, and forests. The scorching mass moves at incredible speed, consuming buildings, roads, bridges, and cars in its path. Giant fountains of lava shoot upward tens of thousands of feet, creating blazing clouds from which there is no escape anywhere on Earth. Continuous explosions echo through the atmosphere, each accompanied by blinding flashes. Flames and billows of black smoke are visible for many miles around. Near the eruption epicenters, the temperature rises so high that metal melts and asphalt boils right before your eyes. Large megacities located near the volcanoes literally disappear beneath the scorching lava in a matter of minutes. High-rise buildings collapse from the heat and tremors, while glass facades melt and stream down the walls in rivulets. Trees ignite instantly. Forests turn into gigantic bonfires, the heat from which can be felt even from several miles away. In underwater regions, such as the Pacific Ring of Fire, monstrous explosions erupt. Fireballs composed of steam, lava, and ash are hurled from beneath the water, creating enormous craters on the ocean's surface. Coastal cities are struck by monstrous waves, born from explosions and landslides on the ocean floor. Steam rushes into the sky, mixing with ash and gases to form poisonous clouds that drift with the wind. Meanwhile, thousands of small and large volcanoes eject unimaginable amounts of ash, rocks, and hot gases. In some places, the thickness of the ejected material reaches several feet within the first few minutes. A dense layer of scorching ash accumulates on roads, rooftops, and even in the most protected shelters. People caught on the surface watch as the sky darkens, growing dimmer with every passing second. Transportation grinds to a halt. Planes are unable to take off or land. Visibility drops to zero. Even those inside buildings feel waves of heat passing through the walls, and the air fills with the smell of sulfur and burning. Water in rivers and lakes heats up so much that plumes of steam rise from the surface. All living things caught near lava flows or beneath clouds of scorching gas perish almost instantly. But following this fiery horror comes the next catastrophic stage, which will change not only all living things, but the very face of the planet itself. Within just a few hours, the atmosphere will begin to change beyond recognition. The atmosphere turns into a nightmare: ash, toxic gases, and darkness. While flames and lava continue to rage on the surface, a true nightmare takes hold in the atmosphere. Within the first minutes after the volcanic eruptions around the world, trillions of tons of volcanic ash, sulfurous gases, and microscopic particles are released into the air. The sky, which was recently lit up by fiery flashes, is now shrouded in a thick veil. Visibility drops so much that it's impossible to make out details even at arm's length. Dense layers of ash lifted into the upper atmosphere begin to slowly settle back to the ground, covering everything around with a gray, sticky mess. At the same time, sulfurous gas and carbon dioxide form thick clouds that spread across the planet with the winds. In some places, the concentration of toxins reaches lethal levels, making every breath a challenge. On the streets of major cities where people hope to find shelter, the air becomes so acrid that the smell of sulfur and a metallic taste seep in even through closed windows and doors. Damp towels or masks, which might have filtered out some of the dust, are almost useless here. Microscopic ash gets everywhere, irritating the respiratory tract and causing coughing. The residue accumulates on rooftops and trees so quickly that many structures cannot bear its weight and collapse. The electricity goes out. Power lines are destroyed under the weight of the fallout and by lightning, which flashes more and more often in the thick ash clouds. The water that remains after the first waves of heat becomes undrinkable. It fills with dissolved minerals and acid, and the floating particles turn every sip into a hazard. Even during the day, darkness reigns on the planet. The layers of ash in the atmosphere are so dense that sunlight barely penetrates them. The air temperature drops sharply, but the streets remain trapped in toxic clouds nonetheless. Acid rain begins to fall across the entire surface of the planet. Drops saturated with sulfur-corroded metal, plastic, and all living things in their path. Sounds become muffled, and the sky turns into a solid gray wall. Birds and insects, having lost their bearings, stray from their usual routes. Water and food disappear. The entire ecosystem of the planet becomes poisoned and covered with a thick layer of ash. Even the most reliable filters and supplies cannot save the people in hiding. Carbon dioxide and sulfur oxide rapidly fill even airtight rooms. Volcanic lightning becomes a common occurrence under such conditions. Bolts strike between the cloud layers and the ground, igniting anything that might have survived. And while the atmosphere turns into a deadly trap, changes in weather conditions and sunlight begin to trigger an entirely new chain of disasters, affecting every corner of the planet. A drop in temperature and a global winter. Will anyone be able to survive? As soon as volcanic ash completely takes over the sky and fully blocks out sunlight, the entire surface of the planet begins to cool rapidly. Within just the first few days, air temperatures drop by nearly 40 degrees Fahrenheit, turning even warm regions into deep winter zones. Deprived of sunlight, plants stop producing oxygen, their leaves blacken and fall off, and fields and forests become covered with a thick layer of ice. Water in small lakes and rivers freezes, while larger bodies of water are covered with a thick sheet of ice. In cities, heating and water supply systems fail. Pipes burst under the pressure of frozen water, and it becomes colder on the streets and inside buildings than in a freezer. The weakened sunlight doesn't break through even during the day. A twilight reigns over the entire Earth, and nighttime temperatures drop to extremely low levels. People who find themselves in underground shelters try to keep warm with stockpiled clothing and fuel. But even massive concrete walls can't protect against the penetrating cold. Any attempts to make a fire inside the shelters quickly end due to a lack of oxygen and a high concentration of carbon dioxide. The air becomes heavy, each breath becomes more difficult, and any attempt to go outside leads to instant hypothermia. The dense shroud of ash does not dissipate for weeks or even months. The water cycle slows down. Precipitation falls as thick, dirty snow, saturated with acid and volcanic microparticles. Even in shelters, people face a shortage of clean water. Melting contaminated snow or filtering precipitation saturated with toxins is nearly impossible without specialized equipment, which has never been widely available. Animals die from the cold and lack of food. Pastures and forests are covered with a layer of ash. Herbivores cannot find food, and predators quickly lose their last sources of sustenance. Birds die from hypothermia or are unable to navigate in the perpetual darkness. Within a few weeks, most mammals disappear, and only rare insects and bacteria remain underground. All living things depend on the sun, but now it seems as if it has vanished forever. Even the deep layers of the oceans begin to cool, and the water becomes saturated with dissolved poisonous gases. All that remains is to watch as a so-called volcanic winter forms across the entire planet, a global catastrophe in which almost no one can survive. But while freezing cold and eternal night rage on the surface, far stranger and more destructive processes begin to unfold underwater and deep within the Earth, processes that will change the face of the planet even more dramatically. Oceans that are boiling, chemical reactions happening all over the world. While the endless winter continues on the surface and the sun is almost nowhere to be seen, a no less terrifying apocalypse begins in the oceans. Billions of gallons of scorching lava and magma from all the underwater and coastal volcanoes pour into the water, causing an instant release of steam and a monstrous rise in temperature. In some areas, the water temperature rises so quickly that the ocean layers boil, literally turning entire sections of the sea into giant cauldrons. Clouds of steam rise for miles into the air, mixing with volcanic ash and gases. Water molecules collide with the scorching lava, and deep underwater, an aquamethane explosion begins. Methane deposits, hidden for centuries in the ocean floor, are released into the atmosphere. The air fills with an explosive mixture of steam, hydrogen sulfide, sulfur oxide, and methane. Each such release can trigger new explosions or even localized firestorms right above the ocean's surface. The chemical composition of the water changes within just a few hours. The enormous amount of dissolved sulfur and metals turns the oceans into a poisonous mixture in which not even the most resilient extremophile fish can survive. Millions of fish, mollusks, and plankton die almost instantly. The entire ecosystem collapses under the terrifying concentration of toxins. Sharks, whales, and other large animals beach themselves in a desperate attempt to escape, but find only death in the acidic waves. At the same time, the eruptions release a massive amount of carbon dioxide into the ocean. Under the influence of heat and pressure, the water becomes saturated with carbon dioxide, causing a sharp increase in acidity. The pH level drops to dangerous values. Coral reefs, accustomed to clean water, are destroyed right before our eyes. All underwater plant life perishes. Chemical anomalies appear on the surface of the oceans. Huge patches of water turn yellow, green, and red due to dissolved minerals and metals. Deadly waves of acid spread along the coasts from the Gulf of Mexico to the Mediterranean Sea. Oceanic winds carry caustic fumes hundreds of miles inland, burning foliage, corroding metal, and poisoning all living things in their path. Meanwhile, in the depths of the seas, new monstrous reactions begin to occur. Methane and other flammable gases are released and ignite upon contact with molten lava. In several places, underwater explosions occur, causing massive waves that destroy coastlines and sweep away everything in their path. Ocean currents come to a halt. Millions of tons of ash and solid debris clog the waters, disrupting the usual circulation. Water that could previously be filtered or distilled even in an emergency now becomes deadly dangerous. Even after passing through several filters, it is saturated with acid, sulfur, heavy metals, and radioactive substances from deep within the earth. Not only the oceans, but all rivers, lakes, and underground springs turn into a deadly mixture. And while water, which once gave life, now brings only destruction, the catastrophe is already overtaking those who managed to survive the first days of the apocalypse. Now, literally, all inhabitants of Earth are under threat, from the tiniest bacteria to people trying to save themselves in their shelters. Animals and humans. What will happen to the planet's inhabitants? When the deadly mix of acid rain and poisonous ash finally engulfs the earth, survival on the surface becomes impossible even for the hardiest animals. Birds lose their way, their wings are coated with sticky ash, and their airways are clogged with microscopic ash particles. They fall to the frozen ground and die with no hope of rising again. Small mammals hiding in burrows quickly face a shortage of air. Volcanic gases fill even the deepest underground shelters. Oxygen is washed out of the atmosphere, and every breath is filled with toxins. In large cities, people who have taken shelter in basements and bomb shelters struggle desperately to hold back the inevitable intrusion of ash and gases. Air filtration masks quickly become clogged, water filters fail, and the moisture becomes too acidic to be even remotely drinkable. Those who attempt to leave their shelters in search of resources face instant death. The freezing cold and lack of oxygen paralyze within minutes. Even in airtight rooms, suffocation begins. Air supplies run out, and ventilation only draws in new waves of toxic clouds. Animals that once lived in the forests can no longer find food. All the plants have been swept away by ash, and the herbivores are the first to die. After them, the predators perish, having lost their prey. Migrating herds, which usually escape disasters by fleeing, this time encounter frozen rivers and acid snow that burns through their hooves. In some places, animals huddle together in small groups trying to hide in the ruins. But even there, they cannot escape the cold and the lack of oxygen. Closer to the ocean, the last inhabitants of the beaches and coastal areas crabs, birds, even large predators face the advancing waves of acid. Burnt skin, corroded eyes and lungs, and the lack of fresh water, all of this makes death swift and agonizing. In deserts and mountains, inhabitants like snakes, lizards, and insects simply freeze, and the surviving insects die from lack of food. In the cities, the last people struggle to communicate with each other through fogged-up, soot-covered windows of underground shelters. Handheld devices stop working. Batteries drain faster than ever since electricity is no longer being supplied. Communication is lost. And across vast expanses, silence reigns, broken only by the occasional rumble of volcanic eruptions. The deeper below the surface, the higher the chances of survival. But even in mines and caves, the air keeps getting worse, and the temperature drops below 0 Fahrenheit. The last survivors struggle painfully for every breath of air and every scrap of edible food. But with each passing day, it becomes clear there is no hope for a return to normal life. Meanwhile, bacterial colonies capable of withstanding even such extreme conditions survive in deep cracks within the bedrock and in chemical oases on the ocean floor. Some microorganisms begin to mutate. adapting to the poisonous gases and the icy darkness. They become the planet's only inhabitants, while on the surface the last traces of familiar life disappear. But even underground, temperature and acidity are constantly changing, and no one knows whether these tiny creatures will ever be able to breathe life back into the newly desolate Earth. Deep within the planet, volcanic activity still persists. New chemical reactions trigger a phase of long-term changes that will transform Earth into an unrecognizable world. What will remain of the familiar planet after such a total cataclysm? And will it have any kind of future at all? A future without a future. What kind of land will remain after a total eruption? When the roar of the last volcanic explosions gives way to a heavy silence, the land no longer resembles the planet it once was. The surface is completely covered by a thick layer of solidified lava, interspersed with ash. In some places, this layer reaches several hundred feet, concealing the former landscapes beneath it. Former cities are barely recognizable by the silhouettes of buildings, bridges, and metal structures frozen in the lava flows, which blacken and gradually crumble under the effects of acid rain. The waters of the oceans and seas now mostly consist of a murky, poisonous sludge filled with the remains of dead marine creatures and a vast amount of toxic compounds. The shores have disappeared, replaced by impenetrable deposits of sulfur and metallic masses, fossilized coral remains, and charred seaweed. The atmosphere, saturated with sulfur dioxide and carbon dioxide, is dense and heavy. The sun never appears on the horizon. Even many years after the catastrophe, the sky remains gray and the daylight is so dim that it casts no shadows. Rain falls rarely, more often as a caustic acid mist. Snowfall does not melt but accumulates in layers of dirty ice mixed with ash. The soils are dead due to high acidity and the absence of microorganisms. The entire surface of the planet is sterile and unsuitable for the growth of even the hardiest grass. Groundwater and deep rivers are oversaturated with iron, sulfur, heavy metals, and acids. The old sources of fresh water have disappeared. The rivers have turned into rusty streams, carrying along fragments of petrified driftwood and debris. Ocean currents have stopped. The water stagnates and quickly becomes unfit for life. In the craters of former volcanoes, hot springs bubble, hot enough to cook a person in just a few seconds. There are no traces of large animals or humans, only the occasional twisted remains buried under layers of ash. In caves and deep underground, at depths of dozens of miles, isolated colonies of bacteria and primitive organisms survive for a while longer. They feed on chemical emissions, slowly mutating and adapting to the extreme acidity and temperature. Beneath a layer of volcanic glass formed by the rapid cooling of lava, new minerals and crystals begin to form. This process takes centuries. Meanwhile, the planet's surface transforms into an impassable wasteland of petrified fields and new mountain ranges. High in the atmosphere, the slow settling of ash particles continues. Even decades later, microscopic flakes still settle from the sky, carried by winds from long-cooled lava fields. Volcanic craters occasionally release remnants of hot gases into the air, creating new local cataclysms. The Earth turns into a barren, frozen planet where no creature can breathe without complex filters and protection. Plants and animals disappear completely. In their place, rare clusters of extremophile bacteria take hold, capable of surviving where concentrations of acids and metals are lethal to any other form of life. In a brief historical instant, the entire biosphere of the planet is destroyed, and the Earth itself comes to resemble something between Venus and Mars. The remnants of civilization soon dissolve among lava fields and hardened flows of mud. A period of absolute silence and stillness begins. Not a single sound, not a single movement of air. In place of what was once a noisy, living planet, there remains only a fragile and eerily empty sphere, shrouded in a poisonous atmosphere and eternal clouds of ash. Everything that was once known as Earth disappears, giving way to a world where there is no longer a future for humans, for animals, or even for the most ordinary blade of green grass.